Hi, everyone. I am Laura Bucheri, the Director of Publicity at Copper Canyon Press, and I am coming to you live from Brooklyn. You are watching our new interview series, Line Break, which goes off the page and into the homes and minds of our beloved poets. I've always really had the dream of seeing more poets represented on screen, talking shop, answering questions, and just taking us behind the scenes of how they do what they do. So in this episode, we are speaking with Natalie Senter-Zapico. Natalie, thank you so much for being here. How's your day going? Is it going all right?
It's okay. Yeah, it's all right.
Okay.
Hanging in there.
All right. Okay, I like starting from that place. I'd love to have you quickly introduce yourself. Maybe just name, pronouns, where you live, most recent book you published.
Yeah. So my name is Natalie Senter-Zapico. I'm currently living in Tampa, Florida. Pronouns she, her, hers. And my most recent book is Lima Limon by Copper Canyon.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Before moving to Tampa, you moved there recently, right? Where were you before that?
In June.
In June. Okay. You were in
Tacoma, Washington.
You were in Washington. Okay.
For a year. And then I was in Vermont for a year. And then I was in Nebraska for a year.
You're getting like warmer and warmer climates.
I know. This is a kind of warm that's really different than where I'm from, right? El Paso, Texas.
That's right. This is like that humid, muggy, like step outside, your shirt is just drenched already, kind of humid.
Yes. Yeah. Although it's really pretty right now at this time of year.
Isn't it hurricane season?
No, it's not. It's not right now. No, the summer is like, I feel like I need to get out of here in the summer.
All right.
Yeah. But right now I ffeel like I can see why people come here in the winter. I get it.
I love it. Like a PSA, move to Florida.
But just for a few months, like in January, like.
I love that. Well, as much as I would love discussing the ins and outs of living in Florida with you for 30 whole minutes, I'd love to maybe dive into some poetry specific questions.
Sure.
I kind of wanted to like go back to the beginning almost and like kind of ask why you started writing poetry and like did you see yourself represented in poems you were reading? Were you interested in how language being used that way? Were you like inspired by a song or movie or something that kind of inspired you to make something and then it came out in poetry? Like how did it all begin? I'm so curious.
Yeah, so I grew up in a house that had poetry in it, which is not maybe what a lot of people are used to, I think, in the US. My mother always loved to recite poems and read poems. It was sort of very much a part of the way that she still speaks. Where she'll sort of put in lines from things that she's read.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, that's very her in Spanish. And so I always had this real kind of reverence for it. And that there was a lot of sort of wisdom that could be held, I think, in poems, but also kind of emotional distillations, right? So like expressing an emotion that I otherwise could not, right? That someone else could express that feeling in a way that perhaps I could not. And so I've always sort of, I think, turned in that way organically, right, through my mother to poems. I was not one that I sat down though and thought myself a poet. Does that make sense? I mean, I think like when I think about where it came from, it probably came from that place, but I wasn't like, and that's why I started writing, no, not at all. I think I always kept diaries, and I use that word because you know, it's so gendered in so many ways. And, you know, because like boys journal, right? And that's cool. And, you know, when girls do it, they're like writing in their diary. And so I did that for a long time, for many years. And I just didn't really, I wasn't writing like Dear Diary, right? But like I was just sort of keeping notebooks.
Were the poems though? Like looking back on it?
They were just sort of thoughts, reflections, observations. A lot of it was observations, like things that I was observing around me.
Which is very poetic.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a lot of it. I used to keep a lot of lists of things that would like things I would overhear or things, you know, stuff like that.
Ooh, eavesdropping. That's
a lot of that.
Well, so okay, so then when was it where is it like high school? Is it post high? Is it college?
College.
College that you turned to kind of more formal, whatever that means, poetry writing?
Yeah, well, in college, I took a class. It was like an intro to creative writing class on a whim, totally, with Daniel Chacon, and who's, you know, at UTEP still. And he's a fiction writer, but he was like really trying to dive into poetry. And he did his entire intro class, which I think was supposed to be 3 genres, just on poetry. That's it. We didn't get to the other genres. Like we never got to it.
Wow. Yeah, go ahead.
And no, and I just, more than anything, what I got out of that class that I really liked was that I could use what I was already doing with journaling, and that there was value in playing with it and revising it. So I used to just like never really go back. It was just always like, here's all the, you know, forward momentum, turn the page, you know, kind of thing. And I really fell in love with like going back. And looking at something again, and like playing with the ordering of things and how you could create different meanings with different orders, and what that might do to the language, to a moment. And you know, I really kind of became fascinated with that.
Yeah. I mean, that's a form of observation too, right? Like that, observing how many ways you can make something, one word even, different depending on, you know, where you place it, what the lines are like, you know, where you break the line. I think, I don't know, I kind of like that obsession in going back and kind of playing with form and things like that. I also had a similar experience when I took a creative writing class on a complete whim because it fit in my schedule freshman year in college.
Yeah.
And it did turn out to be mostly poetry. And I was like, oh, like this is not what I remember from high school, which was very much like quite boring and quite uninspired in my opinion, the way it was taught. And I was like, oh, this is like, the language is kind of cool. Like the language is kind of like how I think, or like how I relate to things. And so I was shocked. I was like, poetry, but you know, here we are. like that's what I spend my days around. So
and one more thing, just really quick.
I want to hear
is that one of the things that I didn't have the language for it then, right, at that time, but looking back, I think one of the things that I really loved and was like really amazing for me and focusing on poetry like that for the first time was that it was the first English, you know, creative writing class that I took that was not argument based.
Wait, say more on that.
Yeah, so I look back, and one of the things that I love, right, about poetry is that, you know, it's really different than writing an essay or writing a story, in that you don't have to have a set argument in place, right? It's not about you know, if anything, that makes for a bad poem, right? When you're really like, this is my argument, I know how I feel about this.
Right.
Like
There's
you're
no
in a world of trouble if you go
Yeah.
into a poem writing it that way. And so that made a lot of sense to me. To me, I'm always very like, I don't know how I feel. And that was valued in some way, that wasn't like something to be ashamed of. Because, you know, think about it. I in so many of our English classes, you're like even forced to take a side.
Oh, every time. I mean,
even if you don't know.
The way you're taught to write an essay is absolutely what is your argument. That is step number one. Yeah, that and that's so true. I never thought about the fact that any writing that we were probably doing in those classes was quite argument based and was very linear in how it was planned out. The fact that it was planned. Like I remember planning my essays out, like how they taught you. And you're so right. Like I've never once planned a poem, to be honest. It's just because it's so fun to go with it. It's so fun to have it take you places. And it's so associative in my mind too. Like when I had you use one word and it immediately leads me into another. And like, I love following that train of thought. It's so fun. And but I never thought about the fact that it was probably the first time I've ever been able to do that in a traditional classroom setting.
Yeah. And that it was valued, that it was like, this is a good thing. Like this can be smart. This can be intellectual. I was like, oh, wow. Okay, cool. Let's study this.
I kind of love that. But did you, when you were in that class learning about poetry, were you aware of the fact that like you had kind of grown up like with poetry, with your mom reciting poetry and with like kind of around poetry, or were they two very separate things?
I think they were two separate worlds for me. Yeah, for a very long time. I think it was more like I would go into these classrooms and they would read, they would show a poem by Octavio Paz, or they would show a poem by Lorca. And I'd be like, oh, I know this poem. But I didn't know I know this poem.
So when did the two worlds ever merge? Was that Lima Limon? Was that when they merged? Or have they not ever?
I don't know. I mean, maybe in some ways. I think in Lima Limon, I think I was really interested in creating showing the kinds of women that I grew up around, that I was, also that I am as a woman, and also the kind of women that I grew up, I guess not just like family grew up around, but also friends grew up around, or that were immediately in my community, that I think carried a lot of wisdom and a lot of music and a lot of poetry in them. And that it was never viewed, I mean, it was sort of like, it was never viewed as intellectual in a lot of ways. And I think it's deeply intellectual. Yeah.
100%. I mean, I do get that from your work, from how you can hold, the language, I think is very intellectual. How you hold, how you even make like daily, almost mundane tasks, womanly tasks as almost heroic in a way, I think is really interesting. But I am curious because like a lot of Lima Limon, it's English, but it's also in Spanish. Like, I guess was that, and I think that is quite intellectual. As somebody who has taken Spanish for 10 years and cannot speak like a word of it, like it is a mystery to me.
That, but
oh, I mean, it's a struggle. And just because my brain, like I am always just like in awe. My superpower, if I could have one, would be to be able to speak and understand every language. I think that would be phenomenal. I would just love that because it's so intellectual. It's so, the fact that you can hold both in your heart, in your brain, and express yourself, especially in poetry, in both of those, I think is like one of the smartest, just most, I look up to that so much. And so I wonder, like, was that kind of a conscious choice of like, I'm going to show that both of these kind of languages that I hold are equal, are both valued, are both intellectual? Was there that kind of thought there, or like take me through kind of, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know that it was that deliberate. I like that.
Yeah.
I think that that's hopefully there. That's great. I think I was more interested in capturing how I feel most comfortable speaking and the people in my life feel most comfortable speaking. It's interesting because I think, my first book, The Virgin Cities, used a lot less Spanglish. I had maybe a few poems with some Spanglish in there. Whereas Lima Limon, I really sort of made it my task. I wanted to explore it, right? I wanted to like really give it some time. And I think it's because in the first book, I was interested in, I don't know what it is, but in my head, I was like, okay, I'm only going to use Spanish if it's something that I feel like I cannot express in English, right? Like that was sort of my rule of thumb. And that's why I think there's not as much Spanish in it in some ways, not because necessarily, I think I was just always like, no, but there is maybe a way. It's just tinkering with it. Do you know what I mean? Like that kind of thing. In Lima Limon, I decided, because it was so overrun by music, I decided to just go with whatever language I thought the phrase or the word sounded better. And so it was all about sound. I didn't care if there was a way to say it in English, or, you know what I mean? If there wasn't something so sacred, like, oh, this can only be said. And, like, no, it's like, it's about how it sounds and also the spirit of the word, right? Like if it loses panache, then it's gotta go in this language, and then in, of course, doing that, in revising, then it became a game of like, okay, well now it also creates, as all Spanglish speakers will tell you, it also then creates its own rhythm, right? The two languages together. And so then you have to play with the musicality between the two languages, right? And how they sound together. And that was a huge part of the project of Lima Limon, for sure.
Wow. I mean, you're right, because I mean, there is so much music and it's based off of like song and things like that, the book is. So I guess that makes total sense in terms of that process. But like, that's a big jump to make from your first book kind of having this rule of thumb of like, well, here's my rule and like hard and fast, I'm going to stick to that, to like not the opposite, but not like,
right.
Was that just felt natural to you, or was that like very conscious in terms of like, I'm gonna try this?
I think I was like, I'm gonna try this.
You're gonna try this. Okay.
Yeah, I was like, I could try this. Yeah,
that's so interesting. Well, I wonder, when your mom would recite poems as a kid, was she reciting them musically, like did they have cadence, or were they more content based when she was
I think a lot of them were very kind of had a lot of cadence.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was also part of why I was drawn to it.
Sure.
Even as a kid, because I was like, whoa, what does that mean? Like it sounds so
music,
cool,
yeah.
but what does that mean?
Yeah.
And I loved that. And I loved the experience of it, that you could just, even doing a really mundane task,
make it music,
whatever, all of a sudden it becomes this like experience, right? Just by reciting a poem, or, just by, what comes to mind in that moment, what poems come to mind in that moment. Wow. I don't know. I was interested in it already.
I'm interested in it. Yeah. I love it. So I'm kind of curious so when I think Natalie Santers-Pico, I'm like, Natalie's a poet. Like you have books out, you're writing a lot, you're doing all the poety things, but you're also like doing, I guess it's interesting when I'm like, Natalie's a poet, so you write poetry, but Natalie's a poet. You also do readings. You also teach. You also do panels. You're also like doing like editing probably, or doing like all of these other hats. I'm so curious if one, so I guess I'm curious on if you, one, consider yourself like a poet. And I guess also, does that mean more than just the writing aspect of things to you? Yeah, I'm just kind of curious about that. Like, is poetry a lifestyle, or is it the craft to you?
I mean, I think that's hard. I think that I've always had, I think, a real, I think now, and maybe still, perhaps it's an air of arrogance in saying that I am a poet. I think when I decided to get an MFA, I was like, no, I am a poet.
Okay.
And it's because I decided in that moment to dedicate my life to this. And even when I've worked jobs that really don't have anything to do with being a poet, I've always said I'm a poet. And even when people roll their eyes, right? Like people don't understand.
Yeah.
They're rude to you, you know, all sorts of things. Especially if you're like if you don't have a book.
Right. That's right? What I'm
They're really nasty, you know, and I've definitely been there, really nasty. I don't know what it is. You can say you're a fiction writer. I don't know if they have the same thing, but poets, it's like you get the worst. I don't know. People are mean. But I think I was always like, that's part of it, right? Is dealing with that kind of idiocy. And I think that's what it is. It's you know, stupid. And I think that they, you know, and I get that, you know, some people have a really hard time saying that they are a poet because they have a lot of, you know, and I have students like this that have a really hard time saying they're a poet, even though they are poets. Absolutely. Because of what that means and all of the baggage that can create. And they have these ideas of like what it means to finally reach a level where you're a poet. But I think, you know, I think of like Gabriel Celaya, right, who talked about, you know, poetry. I'm not interested in a poetry for the bourgeois, right? Like I'm interested in a poetry that's like as necessary as bread. I'm interested in a poetry that doesn't ask you to deny who you are. I'm interested in a poetry that is like my absolute, you know, the absolutely necessary part of life, that there's a part that poetry lines of like human dignity, of you know, of deep emotional empathy to, I think, for other people that it can create, and for yourself too. And I don't know if that makes any sense, but I think that when I say I am a poet, that is what I'm interested in. So even beyond the writing, right? It's about living a life where that is of value, even when people laugh at you. Like that is what it is.
Yes, no, and it's a way of seeing the world, of moving through the world, and no matter having something published or not, no matter having some type of job that relates to it or not, I think that's what you're saying, and I agree with that. I like that poetry, you know, as the bread of life, as like emotional resonance, as just like a way to kind of distill events into a way to digest emotionally. Like, you know, I feel like poets, especially these days, are tasked with like, okay, like coronavirus, like make sense of that in a poem so we can, like, you know, digest it as a culture emotionally, because there's no way to read the news and digest that emotionally without kind of that middle person of a poet, in my opinion. So I do agree with you in that it's a way of seeing the world, in that it's a lifestyle and all that. But it's interesting because I don't think that's true of novelists or, you know, other types of
No.
writing. Maybe it's not. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. I could totally be wrong, but I do think that's very particular to poets.
Yeah. Well, they also, they don't get treated like they're, a fool for being,
sure.
right, a novelist.
Like, you want to be a poet? Like,
right,
what?
right. Whereas, right. Whereas I think like, talking about poetry, especially in US context, is like you're treated like you're, the village fool. Like, okay, you're the poet. Like very, like people are so mean. But also understanding that within that position, usually if we learn anything, the fool is the one that carries most of the wisdom, right? Like that's and who observes. So, that's fine. They can say that, but I'm gonna continue turning to the poets.
I love that. I am too. I especially I agree with what you said about, especially in the United States. That is so the way. When you talk to somebody, one of my friends lives in Germany, and they're, it's treated so there are a lot of less laughs when you talk about it. And they've actually read like
oh, yeah.
poetry. Like it's actually something that's not like, ugh, like it's like a thing that's like they have knowledge of, and then they kind of like, that's a sweeping generalization, of course, but in my experience, that's I don't know, it's something I've experienced.
Well, in the US, most people can't even, if you ask them what is their favorite poem, a lot of them can't even answer that.
What's their favorite book?
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's true too.
Yeah.
Regardless, you're so right.
In any event, well, I would love for you to read from one of my favorite books, which is Lima Limon. Is there a way you could read us a poem from that, or something new you've written, anything like that? And maybe I would love to also like hear a shout out maybe for like a book that you've been reading and loving, so I can add it to my list.
Yeah, I'm teaching right now Abigail Chabibna's How to Dress a Fish, which I highly recommend.
I believe Allison C. Rollins is teaching that as well.
Really?
I think so. Yeah, because I think I'm pretty sure, and that's two people recommending that. So I have to read this book.
Yeah, you have to read it. It's very good, and it's not an easy book, but it's a very, very well done. There's a lot going on here that I'm like excited to talk about with my students. So I highly, highly recommend that book. Awesome. For sure.
Thank you.
Trying to think, is there a poem that you'd like to hear?
Ooh. Are you really asking?
Yeah, I really am.
Ooh, I would like to hear. Ooh, instead of giving you a title, can I give you a page number?
Yeah.
What about page 32?
Okay, so you're picking this at random. Okay, here we go. Ready? No?
Which one is it?
It's He Finds a Kissing Bug. He finds a kissing bug on my eyelid and says it is a tiny curse from the nopal. I ask him why it cursed me, and he says, you ate the nopal's fruit and licked your fingers. He smashes the bug between two fingers and throws it in a plastic cup. It floats on half-melted ice. He smashes it against the cup's side until the blood it took from me pinks the water. The kissing bug is mad, he says. You stole the fruit from its mother, so it wanted to steal from you. I laugh and dab concealer to cover the swelling. I think of the rat's eyes, sharp cameras tracking my theft. They sent the kissing bug to show you, he says. The smallest theft is the swelling of an eye. I close my eyes and run my fingers across each lid. I imagine the red dot rising until I can't see. With a spoon, I rescue what's left of the kissing bug and kiss it the way the kissing bug kissed me.
I love that poem so much. Thank you so much for reading that.
Thank you.
Thank you for also just being such a great guest and chatting and bringing all that great energy. I really just appreciate it so much.
Thank you for having me, Laura.
Of course.
That means a lot.
Of course. And thank you everybody for watching. You know, we'll see you next time for our next episode. And do check out coppercanyonpress.org for all the other episodes. And check out Lima Limon, check out Natalie. Check it all out online. Thank you again, Natalie, for coming, and we will see you soon.
Bye.